everyone that has joined us today for the Culver City Pandemic Recovery General Plan and Development session. I will be the moderator and host today, Colin Diaz, President of the Chamber. I am joined by Kevin Lockoff, who is Director with Newmark CRE, John Nachbar, who is the City Manager for the City of Culver City, Alex Fish, who is the Vice Mayor serves on the Council for the City of Culver City, and Joran Eriksson, who is currently the Mayor for the City of Culver City. So thank you all for joining me this morning. Obviously, the last 8+ months have been nothing that any of us could have predicted, I think, initially coming into it. And it involved a lot of pivoting, a lot of collaboration, research, and some ingenuity. So to start with, want to thank you all, A, for joining me today, and B, for your roles that you've played in where our city's at and where we're headed. So today's topic is really looking at the pandemic and the loss that we've suffered, and not dwelling on that as much as what does recovery look like? How does the general plan update affect that? And how does the pandemic affect the general plan update? And then what are we looking at from the future of Culver City development and land use? So I've given a very brief introduction. I'm going to go around the horn if there's something that you guys would like to add to that. Let's start with, we'll go Kevin, then John, and then I'll round it out with Alex and Jordan about either a further introduction or just a general thought to start us off.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's great to participate in this. Thank you. As Colin mentioned, I work professionally during my day job with Newmark Commercial Real Estate, doing sales and leasing. And I've, in doing so, worked on projects from the Arts District, downtown Culver City, West Washington corridor, the Culver Village area, Fox Hills, and Culver Point. So, I like to think that I've got a working knowledge of all the different parts of our city. I spent 8 years on the Planning Commission, just finished up this past July, and am now involved with the Economic Recovery Task Force and a Chamber Board member. So I certainly like to think I have the city's best interest at heart, and am glad to be participating today as well as throughout the recovery.
Same question, and I would encourage you to share some of the many hats that you had to wear in the pandemic that probably 98% of our community don't know about.
It's been nonstop. And it's just an unbelievably incredible experience. But I want to express my appreciation to Mayor Eriksson and Vice Mayor Fish, and the other members of the council. Our elected officials have just been vigilant, available, engaged, involved, and involved beyond just their roles as council members, but also, working on things like Feed Culver, collaborating with other stakeholders in the community. It's been incredible. The hat question, Colin. I'm city manager, and that's a 24/7 job. But during this entire pandemic, I'm also the Director of Emergency Services. So it's like I'm working 48/14, so to speak. But it's just been incredible. Culver City's a special place. We've, we're faced with a challenge like this, and we've all come together. So I'm so fortunate to be here.
Do it at least once, right? I do it usually once a Zoom call, but I was proving a point that I was actually going to say. One thing that I was going to actually mention is when we're not speaking, we can mute, because sometimes there's feedback from the other speakers. So I will make sure to unmute myself when I speak in the future, but let's go to Vice Mayor Fish.
You did a great introduction. We have a limited time, and I'm just happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Mayor?
Well, thank you. And I think I mentioned something in my earlier speech. We have two challenges. We have the immediate challenge of getting a handle on all the effects of what we're going through right now with the virus. And then we at the same time need to look at our general plan development and see if there is some adjustment that needs to happen in the process.
Perfect. Well, Vice Mayor, I think you brought up a really great point about the time, because we could go on for hours. So I'm going to pitch the first question to you. Obviously, there's been a huge toll to the resident and business community through the pandemic. How do you envision assisting the business community, get back on their feet? I mean, obviously, we need to adhere to the health and safety guidelines, but as we recover, what do you envision that looking like?
Well, obviously the city's capacity is very limited, right? Like, we don't have a printing press in City Hall. So, I think the key for us is to take advantage of the expertise and the synergies that have already evolved on the task force, and to listen and to sort of use our central position and bully pulpit and connections to put together to link people together and to coordinate action that would otherwise be impossible. Because we obviously, the best thing to do would be to give every business what they need to meet rent, to give everybody cash to stay home, and to come out in 4 weeks with way fewer cases. But that's not the path that we're able to pursue. We don't have that anywhere near that capacity. So I think it's really, being a coach and cheerleader, and when we can, player, but to just be scrappy and innovative and take advantage of the resources that we've already gathered together.
John, what are your thoughts in regards to that? Did I lose you?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm unmuting there. I think, the vice mayor is correct. I wish we did have a printing press. We had the printing press he's referring to is one that would print money, I think. And it would be incredibly helpful if the federal government would step in and provide more relief, not only to our businesses, restaurants in particular, but also local government. But nonetheless, that's not our resource. And we will continue to listen to the business community, try to understand their needs. I mean, there are requests coming in all the time, and we do our best to try and, meet those needs as best we can, whether it's, in the beginning, closing off streets in downtown, making outdoor dining available. I mean, there's a long list. Anything we can do to make things easier or put businesses in a position to recover, we're going to try and do it. We're committed.
Mayor, same question. And you're muted now.
I think the vice mayor and city manager has covered the aspect. But I think that in a way is that for the city is to work as a information hub, a networker, to put different interests and companies and organizations together that might not naturally know about each other or be able or have the connections or contact information. But I also think that from my perspective, it's very important for the government to be very agile and very fast here, because we're starting to see businesses really having, down to their last few dollars, last efforts. So our efforts from the council and from staff, I think, is going to have to be very, very fast, not too fast so we do crazy things, but we have to be fast, and we have to be very, very responsive and agile in how we deal with the first 6 months coming out of the pandemic.
Couldn't agree more. I'm going to actually start the second question to Kevin, because I do think being agile, being fast, and all the points that the vice mayor also made about supporting businesses, sometimes being an advocate or a cheerleader, but also taking action. And one of the biggest things looming, I think, coming out of the pandemic is going to be the commercial eviction moratorium, and really what that payment looks like and what that process is. So I'll start with Kevin from a commercial realtor perspective, and then I'll move to you all from the city perspective. But what do you envision as the best way to go about easing out of the commercial eviction moratorium?
So thank you, Colin. I really should probably start as early as possible. Right now, the eviction moratorium is extended out through March 31st. That will mean that April 1st, 2021 will be a full year that some tenants potentially have deferred their rent. And even before we get to that stage, the new council they'll be looking at is this item. Perhaps even as soon as February 1st, that should probably start to segue where tenants, start to pay back at least start paying a minimum base level of rent, be it 25% or their net charges or something. And the reason for that is twofold. One, because they've got such a looming potential cliff of debt growing each month. Second is that landlords have expenses too, and we don't want properties going into foreclosure, which won't serve anybody.
Thank you. Mayor, same question. What do you envision from the city perspective, where I guess to the extent that the city can be involved in that?
I think the most important thing is that we have to keep a close eye on what the state's doing. Right now, we're constrained by the state. I think that Newsom issued an order that sort of sets. We're coterminous with what the state allows, if I remember correctly. So there are no great answers here. Obviously, where you have big players, it's a lot more likely that that these discussions are already ongoing and that there's a pretty good understanding between the two parties. When you have a small business and a small commercial landlord, those are really, really tough. I think we're all listening, trying to understand the issue, and it's very much in flux. So I don't have any good answer other than that this is a good example of where the mayor mentioned we need to be nimble. That includes us as council members understanding of the situation and the dynamics too. But Mr. Lackoff's point is well taken that we're coming up on a year as of the end of March.
John, what are your thoughts in regards to that?
Colin, I don't really have a lot to add. I wish we, the city, could be more helpful in this regard. This is one of those cases where, we have deep empathy for what's happening out there, but there's not much we have in the toolbox. As others have said, we, the city, need to be open. We need to listen. If there are ways we can help, we'll do our best.
Okay, and we're eventually going to get to the general plan update, which is obviously not only monumental, but when you look at the future of Culver City for years and decades to come, that's a critical piece of it. But wanted to first go into recovery and acknowledge, obviously, there's a huge recovery process that needs to take place for the business community, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the city itself also has a recovery process, and one of which I would argue may not even be realized yet because of when the city's budget year ends. So looking at there was a forecast, a reforecast, if you will, of what was expected from a shortfall of revenue. What are some ways that you can see, since roughly 70% of the general fund has come from the business community, and there's obviously been a slow in revenue there, to either curtail expenditures or drive revenue? How do we, I guess, maneuver in a lean way? And I'll start with John and then go to Mayor Erickson.
Well, I mean, we jumped on this right away. I think I think we reduced spending by altogether maybe $13-14 million right out of the gate. Froze everything we could, cut capital spending. So we immediately became as lean as we possibly could. And we made some, conservative projections about how we were going to end up. It's interesting. We only have 3 months of information so far with the current fiscal year. Our fiscal year begins July 1. It's it's looking like I hate to bank on it, but it looks like maybe our sales tax hasn't declined as much as we might have projected. Evidently, what it appears is that a significant portion of the population continues to spend. A lot of it's online, and we now get a share of those online sales. So some of the loss of sales tax that we experience from smaller businesses is being offset by online sales. Where it's really been hurt, and I checked into the session just before, it looks like our transient occupancy tax, the hotel taxes, we're off by 75%. I mean, the hotels are just been hammered. And then it's the smaller restaurants also really under severe challenge. But I think we had forecasted that we would have a deficit this fiscal year of, I think, about 13 million. I don't think it's going to be as bad, probably, as what we forecast. In addition to maybe some of the revenue, sales tax being better, we also have there was a tax that was approved by the voters, a real estate property transfer tax that goes into effect, I believe it's April. And it will have some impact in this fiscal year budget. Regardless, I think we're going to be okay this fiscal year. We have reserves of, it depends on how you want to look at it or analyze. We have reserves of at least $70 million. We're going to be able to navigate our way through this fiscal year, probably in a little bit better shape than what we thought when we started.
Thank you for that. And Mayor, anything else to add? I know that part of the budgetary concerns even before the pandemic was also tied to the unfunded pension liability. So there's still that portion that has to be addressed over the next several years as well, right?
Yeah, but and the first thing now is to get through this year and next year in a reasonable fashion. And as the city manager said, we've been saving a lot, but that also comes from that we are not hiring really, or we have whenever someone retire or go to another job somewhere else outside the city, we haven't really filled many of those positions. And at some point, I think that we need to start looking at some of those areas where we probably need to hire people to fill those positions. And I think that's going to be really the challenge, because we're not going to have that much money to spend. It's going to be deficit spending. So we have to be very, very careful. But I think that's really going to be the challenge, because we need to look at what's going to happen now when we get out of the pandemic. Are we suddenly going to get a rush of building permits and things like that? Does that mean we need to go out and hire more staff for the building department? Of course, we charge a fee for it, so it balances out over time. But back to this same thing, we need to, very, very carefully look at this on a daily, weekly basis. And as the city manager mentioned, our TUT tax is down 75%. Well, what is that? Well, that is between $500,000 to $600,000 a month, just to give you an idea. So we're looking at $6 to $7-8 million maybe in less revenue from the hotels if we don't get back into some kind of activities toward the end of the spring. So that's the challenge. But I think that really starting looking at where do we need to shore up on our personnel, because we haven't hired many people.
Well, I appreciate both of those comments, and I appreciate the leadership and insight, because early on, John, I know you and I had spoken, and that's, for any organization, it's tough to make those decisions about where to be a little bit more restraint. And so looking to the future, the general plan, now that we'll transition to that, is a pretty large endeavor that the city is taking, and could also inform where we need to have more staff, less staff, depending on land use. So I'm going to start with our vice mayor. I guess from a timeline standpoint, when do you envision, has it been pushed back at all because of the pandemic? I know the conversation is still being had. I'm on a subcommittee, but in your thought, as far as when we will actually have a baked document, if you will, and start to roll out some of those initiatives, has that been pushed? When do you think that we're looking, and what do you hope to come out of this process?
I think it probably, this type of endeavor always goes long, unfortunately. And I think, this is a city with a lot of people with high expectations of government, and with a high degree of being accustomed to having access. And so at every step, we've sort of had the legitimate feedback that, well, we haven't talked enough about this or that. And you can pick any issue, and and you'll find people across the political spectrum saying that. And so it was always going to be a little longer than I certainly would have hoped. Not that I think the feedback is critically important, but I also think it's important that we, sort of get this done and get to work. I think I'll be surprised if we have a final document with everybody's signatures on it in 2021. But that's sort of what we're targeting is the end of the year. But it does sound like, certainly big parts of it, important parts, notably the housing element, need to be done by law by October. So we'll have some significant portions done next year. And then the whole thing, since it is a really all-inclusive document, it's not very often that people do a soup to nuts general plan update. Usually it's an element here, element there. This is a holistic look, and I think it's absolutely justified. It's something I've been calling for over 4 years, almost 5 years now. So I think it's justified. It's going to be a little longer. In terms of, I am going to answer something that you didn't quite ask, which is, I think there's a certain tendency in some people, and I see some relationships among different things that these groups might think, but I think some people are very concerned about whether cities will bounce back from this. And I think you'd have to be out of your mind to bet against 9,000 years of human history. I mean, Culver City isn't just well positioned as a city. Cities in general, I think, are well positioned to take advantage of the economy that exists in the United States right now. I think we see that everywhere. And Culver City in particular is probably best situated. So I think once we're back, we're going to be roaring back. And I think that the issues that we're trying to confront in the general plan are going to be more important than ever. The same issues are going to be much more acute. So that's not don't worry about the spending. Absolutely, we need to worry about the economy. We need to worry about the revenues. We need to worry about the expenditures. But, we still need to grapple with the same problems. Traffic's not going to magically go away. Housing is not going to magically become more affordable when this is done. And in terms of what I hope to get out of it, I think that this has been, I'm encouraged in that I see a lot of discussion, a lot of different perspectives. The ideas are sort of budding together in terms of what we need from the city for the next 25 years. And I think largely I'm seeing thinking and debate that's on the scale of that enormous challenge and task.
Thank you. And I appreciate you bringing up the other question. I partially didn't ask that intentionally because I don't have any doubt that Culver City will be back. If anything, my concern, not just because of my role, but just in general, is how many of, say, the businesses that are here today will be with Culver City in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and that's the part that's challenging. And so when I bring up stuff about budget, it's less about whether the city will be able to sustain and whether it's are there areas where we have some wiggle room that there could be public-private partnership where the city matches some resource with a private resource. And I mean, I've had the conversation before, and I know that we're not in that position, but there are other cities like Carlsbad, for example, that had, I think it might have been 100 or 200,000 in grant funding, small short-term grant for the smallest of businesses, if you will, that were almost like whether it was a STEM loan or short-term grant, those type of elements. So that's what I was referring to there. But I definitely appreciate the question because probably there's somebody listening in that had that same thought. So in terms of general plan, let's go to Kevin and then John. Not so much the timeline, but what would you like to see accomplished in the general plan?
So one thing is important to keep in perspective, and you've both mentioned it, is this document really is a 25 to 30 year plan. And so as much as we are all critically aware right now of the COVID impacts, I do hope that we'll also keep the perspective of the fact that this is an enduring document far beyond this immediate pandemic. That Vice Mayor Fish pointed out is housing affordability. I know that's something that we've all have front and center in our mind, or at least we did until March 13th. And I think that we should be revisiting density and keeping as much of that focused along our commercial corridors through mixed use developments, perhaps tying density bonuses the way they are now with community benefit packages to really help lift up some of the amenities that the city has, help to create opportunity for businesses and residents in parts of the city most affected by the developments, and also to increase affordability. I think there's a lot of tools that the Community Development Director Saul Blumenfeld has at hand in that regard and in mind that will actually help the community immediately and long term through the plan amendment.
I definitely agree, and I think it's funny. I've sometimes I'm in the middle where I hear both sides of the conversation on an item, and one thing I'm looking forward to from the general plan as it relates to business and development and some of the others is an actual predictable schedule. So if somebody's going to bring a project to the planning commission, to the city, to the council, they know whatever the fees are going in, regardless if they're more or less than they are now, and they can make that decision that it pencils out, and it might even streamline some of the process and engagement. So I look forward to that, and I know that will be, one of the 900 pages, if you will, of this activity. John, what from a city perspective, it's been a lot of engagement so far. I think I would say there was really great output in terms of marketing of this process, and then the pandemic hit and still kind of continued, but the general public may not be as aware because may not be front and center to them, or they're not seeing communication. So what would you say that you're either hoping to come out of the process or from a timeline standpoint?
Well, Colin, I think something that would be really helpful to the community long term is the degree to which the community can reach some consensus. Consensus seems to be incredibly elusive these days. Our politics were so split. It seems like in every venue, every aspect, but especially from the standpoint of the business community, developers, etc. Everyone's looking for reliability and consistency. And if we could get some level of consensus from the community about what the development needs, will be, or what we want over the next 20, 25 years, that will just be huge for cohesiveness in the community and predictability and reliability for the business community. And there are huge issues facing us. The next 20 years, the demands on Culver City and the west side here are just going to be enormous. And clearly, density is probably, I don't know if it's the biggest issue, but it might be. It would really be helpful if the community could come together on this whole topic.
Thank you. No, I definitely think consensus building would be huge, but also agree with your sentiments about how fleeting it is at times. Mayor, anything to add to that?
Well, the project has been delayed a little due to COVID, so it's taking longer time just because this type of projects take a long time. So we might have some of the, should we call them chapters, some of the parts done toward the end of this next year. But I'm not sure that we will have a complete plan by the end of 2021. That would be great. But on the housing side, I think that's a high priority. As the Vice Mayor said, we need to have something done by October. And I've been talking a long time about mixed use along our commercial corridor is probably a way to go to entice the private sector to start redevelop some of those areas. So I'm looking forward to those parts of the plan and get those done very quickly.
Thank you. So we're, Vice Mayor predicted this pretty well. The time went by really quick. We've got about 3 minutes left, and by this time next week, we will have a newly seated council with both of you all, along with Daniel Lee, Yasmin, Imani McMorrin, and Albert Vera. And so obviously, for one, thank you all for the work that you guys are putting into the city and the great work ahead. So looking at the final question, as you look at 2021 and your muddy crystal ball, what would you, if there was a sentence or a few words that you have as far as what you think we'll see in 21? So let's start with, we'll put you on the spot again, Kevin. So call it 3 words, I say, to describe 2021.
Recovery, a fairly slow but steady recovery. We'll bounce back, but to your point, there won't necessarily be all the businesses that we were accustomed to. There'll be winners and losers, but we'll make a recovery. And I think it's going to take all of 2021 before we see it.
John, how about you?
I agree with Kevin. It's going to take all of 2021.
Alex?
Here, I'm going to go a little bolder. I think we're going to see more divergence between coastal areas that are well-resourced and other parts of the country. I think that we'll have a quicker rollout of vaccines, and there will be unexpected difficulties in logistics with broad swaths of the country that will mean that while I agree with the timeline that Kevin and John just laid out, I think we're going to see Culver City once again outpacing other parts of the country in recovery.
Mayor?
Yeah, I agree with that point that I think we will outpace a lot of areas, not just in other part of the country, but other part of the state. We have a number of buildings that are sitting there now, and the question is what's going to happen with them. We're going to have vaccination happening here soon, and hopefully most people will accept to go and get vaccinated. And I think we're going to see that a lot of activity is going to come back to Culver City. Maybe some of them in a different form, but I think that this is sort of rebuild and recover. That's what's going to happen.
I want to call that out.
Just really quickly, I'm sorry I can't miss the opportunity for the soapbox really quickly. To the mayor's point about the vaccine and people's uptake, I just want to offer up to anybody listening that I had concerns about the vaccine as well, just the rapid deployment. And I did some research and ultimately ended up signing up for the third phase of the Johnson & Johnson trial. I fully trust that we're going to get a healthy vaccine that's going to move us forward. And I encourage everyone to have faith in this process.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to join our audience members in thanking John, Mayor Erickson, Vice Mayor Fish, and Kevin for joining us this morning. As I said at the onset, this could have gone on a lot longer. We're fortunate didn't solve the world or Culver City problems, but shed a little bit of light on the work that's being done. So I thank you all for that. The final thing that I'd say before transitioning out of here, particularly during the holidays, it seems that people are still spending money, which is great. I would encourage you to make extra effort to spend your money with Culver City businesses. I know how easy it is. I've been guilty of it, of certain online portals that may be very quick and easy to get stuff to you. But to the point that I mentioned to the Vice Mayor earlier, every little bit is going to help sustain these businesses through these difficult periods. And so with that, we'll round out this session. You'll want to head over to the stage now. We'll be getting started with the introduction and then the delivery of the economic outlook by Kevin Clouden in about 2 to 3 minutes. So thank you all for joining, and thanks for our panelists.